I'm Bill, and I am the content creator for visionandprophecy.com. In this video, I want to cover the prophecies of the Antichrist, the prophecies of the False Prophet, and prophecies in Islam, and how all three of these sets intersect and parallel each other, and the implications of that. The agenda for this video is that I will first look at the current modern day scenario and how that might align with Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 converging. Then I want to look at the connections that prophecy has to Islam, really how the kind of the biblical overview connection to Islam. Then I want to connect on the Antichrist prophecies and the false prophet prophecies and the parallels and connections there with Islamic prophecy. And then at the end, I'll kind of summarize these things and communicate how I think that they might fit together into end time prophetic fulfillment. I'll apologize in advance that a lot of these connections are circular in nature, so you're going to hear me reiterate myself just a little bit. I'll try to keep that to a minimum. And I've got a lot more content on the slides than I actually intend to present. So there will be instances where I'll just pause for a moment to allow you to pause the video, and you can kind of take in more information that's on the slides than what I'm actually intending to present at this time. Hopefully I can hold myself to that to keep this video relatively short. First up is the current scenario of how Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 prophecies are converging. We'll start with Daniel 2. In Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar is asking for someone to interpret his dream, and ultimately that interpretation is provided by the prophet Daniel, where he shows that Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a multi-metal typed statue is representing a procession of empires of mankind, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon as the golden head. That kingdom is then prophesied to be conquered by Medo-Persia, which is represented by the silver chest and arms. Then that kingdom prophesied to be conquered by the Empire of Greece, represented by the bronze middle and thighs. Greece is then prophesied to be conquered by Rome, which is represented by the iron legs. And then there's another kingdom that is prophesied to come at the end, which is represented by iron and clay feet, iron and clay combined together. And then, just to finish out the Daniel 2 prophecy quickly, it's then prophesied that a heavenly stone will strike the feet of the statue and crumble the whole thing, effectively destroying the kingdoms of mankind. And that heavenly stone will then expand and fill the world, representing the millennial kingdom of Christ. But backing up one kingdom, before we get to the millennial kingdom of Christ, which is what we're all looking forward to, is the kingdom represented by the feet. Now the iron draws a connection to Rome, but the clay, when I've added the word potters here, but I don't believe the word potter is actually found in Daniel 2 anywhere, the clay is representing some other people group that is intermixed with Rome. And so we'll use the Bible to interpret the Bible. For starters here, Isaiah 64 verses 8 through 12 indicates that, quote, we are the clay and you are the potter, and that we that it's referring to is Jerusalem, and therefore Israel. So it's God's people. The name Zion is also used in there, which is representational of the people of God on earth. Similar language is used in Jeremiah 18 verses 5 and 6, where it says, O house of Israel, can I not do with you as this potter has done, declares the Lord? Behold, like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel. So we get Israel likened to clay in God's hand. Special note too that in that same chapter, in verse 11, God also says that he is shaping disaster against Israel and devising a plan against them. This is exactly what we see in the past with the conquesting empires that come through and conquer Israel. in which she commits a variety of adulterous acts, idolatry and otherwise. But this is also true of the end times period, in which God is bringing yet another beast, yet another kingdom against Israel as a punishment. He's devising a plan against them. So this language in verse 11 holds true both to the events of the past kingdoms and conquesting of Israel, and to the prophesied future conquesting. Since we're talking about beasts, this is sort of a little bit of a recap of my previous video. I go into a lot more depth as far as the identifications of the beasts are concerned, but for Daniel 7, where these kind of overlap is Daniel 7 has 4 beasts. The first 3 are a lion with eagle's wings, which represents Israel, and the what I believe is the current strategic association of Israel with the eagle, which is the United States. The eagle's wings of the lion, which the wings are removed. The second beast is the bear, which seems to correlate with Russia, and I make an argument for that in the previous video. And then the third beast is a 4-headed leopard. It's also winged. My best guess there is the UN, and I give some arguments for that in the previous video as well. But then the fourth beast in Daniel 7 is where the convergence occurs. The latter portion of Daniel 7 indicates that the fourth beast is a kingdom that immediately precedes the kingdom of heaven. The fourth beast is defeated as the kingdom of heaven, the millennial kingdom of Jesus Christ, is ushered in. So that establishes that Daniel 7 is actually an end times prophecy, not a prophecy that was fulfilled in ancient times. So other arguments for that too I presented in the previous video. But the next thing that you need to know about this beast is that this beast is a amalgamation, or a combination, a transformation of the previous 3 beasts. This is confirmed in Revelation 13, where the beast of Revelation 13, the beast of the sea, is described as having the mouth of a lion, the feet of a bear, and the appearance of a leopard. It appears to be like a leopard. These are the 3 beasts that are mentioned in Daniel 7. It draws the connection between the 2 chapters. They're sister chapters. And again, the angel that gives the interpretation of Daniel 7 places this at the end times, directly before the heavenly kingdom. So that's where those 2 prophecies converge. Daniel 2 serves as a greater timeline of mankind, whereas the beasts that are in Daniel 7 are specifically what's going on with the world kingdoms at the end, directly before the heavenly kingdom, the millennial kingdom. We get a little bit more indication of the identity of this final beast, this final kingdom, with Daniel 9:26, which states that the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The people of the prince. So the people that destroyed the city and the sanctuary, we know who, with historic hindsight, were the Romans. And so therefore, the Romans have some association with the prince who is to come, which is later in Daniel 9:27, is the one that confirms a covenant with many, and that the duration of that covenant is the duration of the tribulation period, the 7 years. That individual, the prince who is to come, is a title for the Antichrist, the leader of that world government, the leader of that beast, the 11th horn. At any rate, if you look a little closer at the people that destroyed the city and the sanctuary, you'll find that it's not just that they were Romans, but rather you can find established archaeological record of the legions that were involved in the siege of Jerusalem. And specifically, there were 3 legions that were stationed in Jerusalem, 2 on the western side, 1 on the eastern side, and the Legio Ex Fretensis legion was the one that was stationed in the temple district of Jerusalem during the siege. And you can even learn that that particular legion was composed of Roman citizens who were conscripts. So they weren't Italians, they were Syrians and Judeans, which implies that they were potentially of Israel or the immediately surrounding areas, and or of a sort of generalized Syrian/Arabian descent. And there's a reason why I expanded out to include more of Arabia or the Middle East. I'll touch on that in just a minute, but first, just to kind of package this all together, I'm at least establishing that there's an association with Rome in more of a citizenship standpoint, not really blood relation, and then also some connection with a generalized Middle East, with biblical connections to Israel, which helps kind of confirm that the fourth beast is an amalgamation of the lion with the other beasts, because the lion represents Israel. So the lion is incorporated in that fourth beast. Likewise, the clay is incorporated in the iron and clay feet, both being representational of Israel incorporated in that kingdom. Now, a little bit more as far as the clay potential association with Syria or Arabia is that the Antichrist is typified throughout the Bible, but particularly in the Old Testament, we'll see that the Antichrist is typified in each of the empires that conquered Israel. So each of those kingdoms that was represented in Daniel 2, there is typology to be found referring to the Antichrist. But most prominent, it seems to me, is the association with Assyria, actually, which is not one of the kingdoms that's mentioned in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And that's because the conquest of Israel by Assyria predates Nebuchadnezzar's dream. His dream was prophetic. He was only seeing his reference point and forward. He didn't see the Assyrians in his dream. But I make a case in my previous video, I believe, of why the Assyrians would also be included. Quick version of that is that if you look at the account of Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well, you'll find that the description of how many husbands she had correlates to the adulterous relationships that Israel has had with the kingdoms that have conquested her up to the point in which Jesus is having that conversation. So there's actually, I guess, backwards shadowing, not foreshadowing, but whatever the opposite of that would be, where Jesus is using symbology to, in the moment while he's having a conversation with someone about him being the Messiah, there's a dual purpose happening there that's identifying Jerusalem as this sort of symbolized adulterous nation that has been associated with all these different kingdoms, and the count of the kingdoms would include Assyria. I'll note here too that in Isaiah 31 verse 8, the Antichrist, a title that's given to the Antichrist, is the Assyrian, and I'm confident that the latter half, at least, of Isaiah is speaking prophetically of future events. But it's worth noting that the timing of when Isaiah was written versus when the Assyrian conquest occurred, there's a overlap of years that happens there, but that generally speaking, it appears that Isaiah was written at the latter portion of the Assyrian conquest or after the Assyrian conquest. The problem with this is that Isaiah is a prophet. He's a confirmed prophet of God, and the prophets spoke prophetically of future events. So, while Isaiah could have been actively prophesying against Assyria in some of these chapters, sort of as a reaction, I guess, to the events that are happening with the Assyrian conquest in the moment, at least some of the prophecies that are occurring in the book of Isaiah are future prophetic, with chapter 31 included in that. So that title, the Assyrian, confidently is referring to the Antichrist rather than an individual that's involved in the Assyrian conquest around the time that Isaiah would have been writing the book. I wanted to note too that in Isaiah 1 and Isaiah 10, as well as in 2 Kings 18 and 19, the Assyrian conquest is documented, and Assyria is described as a tool of wrath that's used against Israel. That may also have application to the associations that I'm trying to draw between the clay and sort of modern Arabia, which was previously Assyria, because the God is doing the exact same thing as I highlighted in the verse from Jeremiah, that God is raising a kingdom to bring about wrath upon Israel. That's one of the things that's happening here in association with the tribulation period. And that strong association with the Assyrians is also an association with a people group that has been used as a tool of wrath by God in the past and identified as such. I'll highlight just very quickly that there is parallel between the Christians and the Muslims when it comes to prophecies associated with Syria. For the Muslims, it's a major indicator that the end times period has begun, and it would be a preface to what we would call the tribulation period, what the Christians call the tribulation period, but they refer to it as the reign of their Messiah, and I'll have some more information on that later. Meanwhile, the Christian side of that prophecy associated with Syria is really about destruction and about the end of Damascus. So there is some end times prophecy associated with Syria already. So just more or less just making the case that at least with the other prophecies, you can make the case that they are mentioned in the mix here. The final thing I wanted to note is that as far as the clay association is concerned, while I don't have any direct biblical associations of clay to the Assyrians, archaeologically and historically, Assyrians have a lot of association with clay. The biggest compelling factor of that is all of the clay tablets, the ancient clay tablets of Assyrian records that have been recovered in various archaeological sites give a strong association of the Assyrians to clay. So they're not to be ruled out in that iron to clay association, but the using the Bible to interpret the Bible interpretation most strongly is associated with Israel specifically. One more thing before I switch over to the connections to Islam, too, along those lines, is that if you look at the Revelation 17 beast and the woman, the prostitute of Babylon riding on the beast, I speak on that a little bit in my previous video too. The identity there of the woman is Jerusalem, and so again you get a witness in yet another place in the Bible that Jerusalem / Israel is the kind of, is at least in part the what is represented with the clay being mixed with the iron. It's more or less just a question of, is Syria / Arabia also included in that concoction? Now, let's draw some connections to Islam and maybe strengthen that Arabia connection. Beginning with Jesus. Jesus warned of the deception of false prophets that would come after him, and it is my belief that Muhammad is the biggest of these that Jesus was warning of. If not the biggest would then be the false prophet that's prophesied to come in Revelation 13. As far as Muhammad is concerned, he claimed that he was a prophet, that he had received divine inspired texts that's called the Quran, which provided additional revelations of what God had already communicated and the actions that God had already done in the Torah and the Bible. As far as I'm concerned, the Quran is at best completely made up by Muhammad, and at worst is a demonic inspired false scripture that is specifically designed to deceive mankind. If I wanted to give Muhammad the benefit of the doubt, I have no reason to, but if I wanted to, perhaps he had an actual spiritual encounter and was deceived by the entity that he encountered. But either way, I'm 100% certain that the Quran is a falsehood that has been produced to deceive. Just for starters, that it chronologically follows the Old and the New Testament, and it seems to build off of it, and it claims to be a greater revelation, but yet you find that it self-contradicts with the very first reason on my next slide here being that the Quran says that the Bible and the Torah confirm the truth of the Quran, when in fact that is not the case. An easy example of this I'm not going to read all this. It's on the slide, by the way. But an easy example of this is that Muhammad invites people to judge the Quran based off of the Bible to determine if the Quran is to be believed or not. He believed that they aligned. They don't. You find that the Quran states that Allah has no son, for example, but the Bible claims Jesus to be the Son of God. The biggest one there being the very bottom bullet point where the Holy Spirit descends on Jesus when he's baptized, and then a voice from heaven, God's voice, literally says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." If you can't take God at his own word in his own book, I don't know what else. I don't know what else to tell you. Like, God has a son. God identified who his son was. Matthew 3:16-17. Case closed as far as I'm concerned. Another example of the Quran just spouting lies is in Tuba 930. It's communicated that the Jews believe that Ezra is the son of God. This is also repeated elsewhere in the Sahih Bukhari. There's no evidence of this being true. There's a lot of debate online as far as this particular text is concerned about misinterpretations or the Jews potentially trying to deceive Muhammad. It's really difficult to suss out like what the actual truth is in this, other than that the plain reading of what the text says is false. For whatever reason, it's a falsehood in a text that claims to be divinely inspired. Quickly, the last one here, in Al-Isra 17:1, it claims that Muhammad made a night journey to the farthest mosque. This farthest mosque terminology is used elsewhere to refer to the Temple of Jerusalem, which wouldn't seem like a problem, except for that the Quran was written 550 years after the temple has been destroyed. So it makes no sense that Muhammad would have made a journey to visit it. So appears to be another lie. There's a huge list of these. You don't have to do a lot of research to find a bunch of those, but Islam's a lie. But the key takeaway from that is that Islam and the Quran were built on information that was available in the Bible already, at least in part, and it tries to use the holy text to validate itself. And this is because this is a like a parasitic kind of nature that's happening here. The text that came at the end is trying to validate itself, for the sake of deceiving. It has every characteristic of the kind of thing that Satan would want to do to pull people away from the holy text. And that's the exact thing that that's the exact thing that Jesus is warning of with the false prophets, is that deception, extreme levels of deception will occur and will deceive many. Anyway, I've hammered that enough. The other thing that I want to connect here as far as Islam is concerned before I move on to the prophecies is there is a well-documented argument for the worship of Allah and Islam in general having association with pagan deities in the Middle East, borrowing concepts, materials, practices, you name it, literally borrowing idols from. It seems very likely to me and to others that Allah is first a generic name for a god, and that it was because of this sort of generic approach to the language, not non-specific pronouns, non-proper pronouns, I should say, that allowed for a transition effectively of what I think was Baal, the actual Baal of the Old Testament, transitioning to be the chief god of Mecca and Kaaba, the two most holy locations in Islam, and then that idol and the deity associated with it to then be referred to as Allah, which is again a generalized word. In the same way that in English we use the word God, we can be capital G or lowercase g, but it's referring to a divine being. Allah is effectively that, a being that's worthy of worship, usually specifying the highest, the chief God, which As you can read here, you can pause and read the rest of the content, or follow the link that I'll provide in the description to Sam Shamoun's documentation of this. I spent some time confirming his sources and also doing a little bit of my own personal investigation into the matter. Highly recommend listening to him as far as this particular subject is concerned. I'll have links to his video and also to his blog posts associated with this, so you can check all that information out for yourself. But I won't belabor this anymore, other than to say that it appears that there's a direct connection between Baal and Allah, and that has implications on what I'm about to present. One more slide that I'll just kind of pause briefly on. This is a little bit more of an exhaustive list of characteristics associated with the Antichrist. It's not all-encompassing. There are other characteristics that I didn't include here, but these are kind of the main hitters. I don't think I left out any big ones, but I'm not going to go through all of these. Instead, I've taken a selection of these and then highlighted how they parallel with the Muslim prophecy of the Muslim Messiah, the Al-Mahdi. All right, so starting at the top, the Antichrist is prophesied as a prince who is to come in Daniel 9:26. I've already mentioned this previously. The Al-Mahdi is prophesied to be a direct descendant of Muhammad, and many of the direct descendants of Muhammad that are documented direct descendants of Muhammad enjoy high status in society today, with many of them being considered princes. Not all, but many. Prophecy for the Antichrist also includes Roman citizenship of some kind, Judean, Syrian, or Arabian heritage. This could, as far as the Roman piece of this is concerned, it can pretty easily be satisfied. The individual could either actually be a Roman citizen, or much more easily just consider the nature of the beast that is to come is going to be predominantly Roman in nature. It's going to have similarities to the Roman Empire, so much so that the Daniel 2 depiction of the kingdom and the kingdom that came before it is Rome, and then some alternate version of Rome that's intermixed with clay. So it's some form of Rome that has been altered in some capacity, effectively, right? And so just having an individual that is a member of the beast kingdom that has similarities to Rome seems to me to be enough to kind of satisfy the Rome citizenship. I don't think you really have to go more any deeper than that as far as the Rome connection is concerned, but it could be more direct than that for the actual Antichrist himself. The individual will also have ties to the Middle East. That should be pretty plain to see. But with the clay in particular, we can use the Bible to interpret the Bible and say that would be probably Judean or Syrian, based off of Daniel 9:26. And we could use the clay from Daniel 2 to kind of strengthen a connection to the Judean piece in particular, and Israel. But there's some wiggle room there as far as where Israel specifically might apply versus for like the kingdom in Daniel 2 versus where Syria or Assyria might have a little more application to the Daniel 9:26 verse. So I'll leave that to your own discernment, but it seems to me that Assyria is still a reasonable fit for the Daniel 9:26 piece in particular. I wanted to give an example here that if you expand it out to the Assyrians, you could potentially include the Saudis. I know that a popular candidate for people in the community, the Watchman community, is for Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, to be considered as a potential Antichrist figure. The Saudis would not be included if you held to a really strict Syrian/Judean bloodline for the Antichrist. But if you allow for that to include Assyrian Empire, then you're talking from Syria all the way across to Iraq and kind of down through Israel and into Egypt for the Assyrian Empire, and that would include Iraq. I think I said Iran earlier, but I meant to say from Iran to Syria. At any rate, it would include Iraq, which is really where the Saudis would trace their lineage, because they would be a tribe that came kind of from a centralized Iraqi kind of southeastern Syria, southeastern Syria type of location, and that they moved southward and then ultimately established the Saudi Arabian kingdom a few hundred years ago. So they could potentially be included if you expand out to that Assyrian Empire territory, but if you take a more strict interpretation of the people group information that we have available to us in association with Daniel 926, then you would kind of exclude the Saudis. That's also assuming that they don't have some other Judean or Syrian heritage that is just not public knowledge. Let's see. The next point to cover is that the Antichrist will be empowered by Satan. This is found in 2 Thessalonians 2 and also in Revelation 13. Why I think this might be significant is that the Al-Mahdi is prophesied to be changed overnight to sinless and incorruptible. It's not necessarily that the individual was sinless and incorruptible beforehand. In fact, they think that the Muslim Messiah will be just a regular Muslim, devout, but just a regular person, sinful, not perfect. And that overnight a spiritual, deity-driven change will occur for this individual, kind of purifying them, so to speak. And that could have correlation to being empowered by Satan directly. It could even start to take the look of what happened with Judas, where it's documented that Satan entered Judas. It wouldn't surprise me at all if that was also typology for the Antichrist, and that this empowered by Satan might actually indicate some form of almost possession, something along those lines, and that to the Muslim, if this were to occur to a Muslim individual, it could appear as an overnight change, where this individual is suddenly operating at a higher knowledge level than they had before, let's say, far from sinless or incorruptible, however, but perhaps Satan would be on his best behavior for achieving his goals at that point in time. The final bullet on this is, on this particular slide, is that the Antichrist will confirm a strong agreement for many for 7 years, and this correlates to Muslim prophecy in that they have an expectation that the Al-Mahdi will reign for somewhere between 5 and 13 years. It varies from people group, Muslim group to Muslim group, how long they think the Al-Mahdi will reign, but generally speaking is 5 to 13. I think more commonly it's probably 5 to 9, really. And so 7's, kind of smack dab in the middle of that range. Fits the bill as far as a parallel is concerned. A few more parallels here of the Antichrist prophecies and the Al-Mahdi prophecy. Both will be associated with peace, but also associated with coming destruction. They're effectively rulers that will be promoting peace, but will conquest those that disagree with them. Both are, the Antichrist is prophesied to end daily sacrifices and offerings of the Jewish people. The Al-Mahdi, while not prophesied to do this specific thing, is prophesied to convert or conquer all non-Muslims. So any other religious group that was practicing sacrifices and offerings to another deity would likely be suspended, especially if they are practicing it on the Temple Mount, where the Muslims' third most holiest site is currently. The Antichrist is prophesied to persecute the saints, and again, the Al-Mahdi is prophesied to lead a world government that will conquer and or convert all non-Muslims. They will be looking to overthrow governments and establish Muslim jurisdiction and their form of justice. The Antichrist is prophesied to be boastful and blasphemous towards God. Not a stretch of the imagination at all to understand how Muslims could potentially be blasphemous towards Jesus or God. If that's confusing to you at all, just go back to where I was talking about the Quran self-contradictions and contradictions with the Bible, and you will see very quickly how just, something as simple as denying the godhood of Jesus could be blasphemous in nature. The Antichrist will go even farther as to set himself up as God or make some form of a deity claim for himself, it seems. That's not in Muslim prophecy, but if you get to that point, it's kind of too late for all involved. Though I think that the Muslims are going to go with whatever's kind of given to them at that point, to be honest with you. Anybody that's in this people group and is bought in as deep as that, as deep as the middle of the tribulation period, is pretty committed at that point. The Antichrist is prophesied to honor the god of fortresses, which is a god that his fathers did not know. And I find this one particularly interesting in that, first, consider that the Muslims claim to be a Abrahamic people group. They will draw their lineage from Abraham through Ishmael, generally. Allah is not a god that was worshipped at that time. They'll make the claim that Allah is the same God as the God of the Bible, which is patently false. I, on my previous slides, showed that there is argument to be made that Allah might be associated with a different god of those times, being Baal. But generally speaking, whichever god this figure would be worshipping would not be known by Abrahamic forefathers, and Allah, Islam, was established hundreds of years after Jesus. So the forefathers would have had no knowledge of the modern day Allah unless he was present in some other form. The other interesting thing about this text is that it says it names the god as the god of fortresses, and I've seen some people argue that this is an indication that it would be like a god of war, something along those lines, and make a tie to Allah as in that sense. But I think it's actually a little simpler than that. The word fortresses is mazim in Hebrew, which is refuge. So a god of refuge is what we're looking for. And among the many names that are attributed to Allah in the Quran and elsewhere is the ultimate god of eternal refuge. So, we have a direct connection. The god of fortresses, the god of refuge, the god of mazim could directly be the same name for Allah, the ultimate god of eternal refuge. So I'm sure you see the connection there. I'll just make myself move on. The Antichrist will be associated with another leader called the False Prophet, who will contribute to overall deception and direct the world to worship the Antichrist and his government, the beast. So here is kind of the main focus of this video, honestly, is that this false prophet is prophesied to point to the Antichrist and tell the world, you need to worship this individual, and you need to support the governmental organization that he's establishing, the world empire that he's establishing. This has direct connection to Muslim prophecy as well, because Muslim prophecy is not that just the Messiah will come, but Muslims also say that in the end times a false resurrected Jesus will come. And I add the word false. They believe it'll be the real one, but it will not be the real one. At least none of their prophecies come to seem to pass. Instead, it'll be a false Jesus who Islam attributes to be a prophet. Islam generally teaches that Jesus is not the Son of God, as I've already documented elsewhere in the slides, but instead is a prophet. This would explain why Revelation 13 describes the false prophet as looking like a lamb, in that Jesus is established in all of those scriptures there on the fourth bullet as the lamb who was slain, for example. because of this identification, it makes perfect sense that the false prophet would look like a lamb if a fake resurrected Jesus is one of the two horns or kings or leaders that are prophesied to be part of this religious organization of the second beast in Revelation 13, the beast of the earth. This beast is also prophesied to speak like the dragon, which gives an indication that there's an association with Satan. We get that elsewhere. But there's association with blasphemy against God. And again, I've already established that there's very little stretch of the imagination required to see how that would connect to Islam, which does not worship the God of the Bible. So just to maybe over-explain this, what that would effectively look like then is two figures of a religious body described as the beast of the earth in Revelation 13. Two figures, one of those appearing to be a false Jesus that, in alignment with Muslim prophecy, would be pointing to worship another and indicating that he is just a prophet and not actually the Son of God. And that other individual could very well be the al-Mahdi, the Muslim Messiah. Alternatively, well, I guess I should say first that if they were pointing to the al-Mahdi as the leader of the world empire, which makes the most sense across the two prophecy sets, then that leaves the second leader of the false prophet, the second horn, up for some level of debate. It could potentially be a resurrected Muhammad, for example, though that is not included in Islamic prophecy. Or another thought that I had is there's going to be I'll highlight this in a little more detail in a minute, but there's going to be a portion of the Christian body that will remain, and I have suspicion that there are certain individuals in the Catholic Church that are going to be among those because of the false doctrines that they've been teaching. And I'll cover that later, but effectively what I'm getting at here is that the second horn could also, take the form of the Pope, for example, or some other major religious figure. I don't document it in this presentation, but there happens to also be parallels with the Antichrist and the al-Mahdi and the expected incarnation of the Hindu god, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment. Doesn't matter. But there's some correlation there too. So you could potentially have some kind of other major religious figure that's stepping in there and sort of, regardless if it's the Pope or whoever, they're at that point probably promoting some form of like universalism, where Islam rather is the all-encompassing fulfillment of the things that these religious groups were prophesying. All of it is designed to point to the system and the kingdom that Satan is looking to establish on earth and deceive as many as possible. So it's a safe bet that second horn is some figure along those lines. But it doesn't give any other distinction as far as the two horns are concerned. So the only thing that I've got is that it looks like the lamb, but speaks like the dragon. A little more on the false prophet is that they hold the authority of the Antichrist government on its behalf. They'll cause people to worship the Antichrist and his government. They will set up some form of an idol / statue that will seem to speak and will seem to be alive. They'll cause people to take the mark of the beast on their right hand or their forehead, and this is a requirement to participate in the world economy. To participate in any form of commerce, you will have to take the mark, which anybody that's listening to this after a mass of Christians have left the earth in the rapture, do not take the mark. You need to figure out another way to do things. Another thing that I find really interesting, parallel, but this one's a little weaker, is that the Muslim resurrected Jesus, false Jesus, is prophesied to kill a opposing set of witnesses, or at least a witness, who will be marked on their foreheads with an Arabic identifier, KFR. And KFR is associated with kafir, which means infidel or heretic. So it's an unbeliever, effectively a non-Muslim. But they're labeled on their forehead as such. Why I find this interesting is that in Revelation 7, the Bible states that a group of 144,000 righteous Jews will be sealed with marks on their foreheads. And this is a thing that happens either directly before the tribulation period or extremely early in the process, depending on your approach to the interpretations of Revelation. But at any rate, there's a group of individuals that are sealed on their foreheads, and that starts to draw a parallel of these prophecies, the Muslim prophecy and the biblical prophecy. But then the KFR also potentially has some significance in that if you take KFR from the Muslim association, it's an infidel, it's an unbeliever. But if you take KFR from the Hebrew association, you get kufr, which is a word that kind of means to remove in the context of a payment, or like a removal of a debt or removal of a sin. Likewise, KFR can be associated with Kippur for that same reason, Kippur being atonement, which again is, a removal of a debt of sin, or a ransom being paid, that kind of a notion. So it's an interesting dynamic that's happening there, that you have prophecy of individuals being sealed on their foreheads in both cases. One of them gives an indication of what that seal would indicate, and that meaning associated with the seal, though not prophesied in the Bible, would have a contradictory meaning. Whereas one side interprets it as a non-believer, the other side would interpret it as one that's been sealed by God and has been atoned for. So that's an interesting dynamic, and I can't make a case that the Revelation 7, 144,000 righteous Jews are somehow the witnesses that are in Revelation 11 who are prophesied to die. There might be other people that make that association. I don't have the means, I haven't perceived a way in which those two groups are connected. So I don't make that connection, but there is also, it's worth mentioning, prophecy of witnesses being killed, but they're not, to my knowledge, the individuals that are sealed on their foreheads. A little bit more on the false prophet. He being the beast, the false prophet beast, will deceive the world with miracles and direct the world to worship the Antichrist and his government. Effectively what Revelation 13 says, Revelation 13:13 specifically, says that they'll be able to perform miracles in public, which will include fire from heaven. And this now is the reason why I was drawing the connection of Islam to Baal, because the largest account associated with Baal in the Old Testament is the instance in which Elijah competes with, I believe it's 450 prophets of Baal. That's some large mass of Baal prophets. The competition is that they will both set up sacrificial pyres, and then they will take turns calling on their respective gods to consume the offering with fire from heaven. The Baal prophets fail. Elijah taunts them with it. It's a pretty entertaining story. And then Elijah instructs that the God of the Bible's offering to be consumed first be drenched in water and even partially submerged in it, and then he calls on God to produce fire from the sky, from heaven, and he does so and consumes the entire thing. So in true Old Testament fashion, they even make it harder, so to speak, on God, and of course it's not harder for an omnipotent God. But first it draws a connection potentially from Baal to Hubal to Allah, and then to this end times kind of prophecy overlap here to have that connection to Baal and to have that connection to the miracle that was performed then, it almost has a little bit of a vibe of, presuming that the other things that I presented are true, that perhaps the deity that's associated with Baal even has a little bit of like a trying to get like some form of revenge or something here. Like they've got a grudge associated with the events with Elijah. Like I got burned, I got disproven at that point in time because I wasn't allowed to do a miracle, and now that God's going to allow me to deceive for a period of time, I'm going to perform the thing that I failed to do when my prophets were calling on me in the past, because God didn't allow me to do it then. So it has an interesting vibe to it. I might be stretching things a little too much there, but felt that it was worth mentioning. That story is found in 1 Kings 18. Recommend that you read it. Recommend that you read the Bible just in general. But that's a good story to read. The other thing I wanted to say about that quickly is that in Luke 12, verse 49, Jesus is also quoted as saying, "I came to cast fire on the earth, and would that it were already kindled." This is in the context of Jesus saying that there will be division, that he didn't come to just produce unity, but rather that he would cause division and judgment, that there's not pleasant things associated also with his coming. But I could see how this verse could potentially be pulled out of context to support a claim of a false Jesus who is performing fire from heaven and saying, see, I told you, like back in Luke 12:49, that Jesus said this, and I'm Jesus. I'm not a fake Jesus, so believe it. At any rate, approaching the hour mark, I'm going to try to summarize all of this quickly and hopefully keep this video under an hour. We'll see. In summary, the biblical prophecy states that the tribulation period will be the duration of a 7-year agreement, which is the duration of the agreement that's confirmed by the prince who is to come, which is another name for the Antichrist. The Antichrist will be associated with forming a world empire that is promoted by 2 leaders of a religious organization. That religious organization will exercise all the powers that world leader has. They'll effectively act on his behalf and aim to cause the world to worship him and the organization that he's forming. Those 2 religious leaders will have the ability to perform miracles in a public setting, which will include fire from heaven. I should note that the counterparts to the 2 leaders of this religious organization will be 2 other witnesses. So there will actually be 2 sets of 2 operating at the same time. 2 of them will be associated with the false prophet and will definitely be doing fire from heaven. Meanwhile, if you go and read Revelation 11, you'll find that there are 2 witnesses that are witnessing the truth, and that they're generally hated by the world and ultimately are killed. And their bodies are left to lay into the street. I believe it's for 3 days, 3.5 days, and then they are resurrected at that point in time, much to the horror of the rest of the world, and then they ascend into heaven. Again, if you happen to be a listener that's listening to this after a massive amount of Christians have disappeared from the earth, you need to figure out which of the sets of 2 you need to follow, and you're going to want to go with the group that's less loved. That's a good indication to start, but you're going to want to go with the one that is most closely aligned to Christians, the ones that were taken from the earth. They were taken for a reason. Hopefully that would be obvious, but there's a lot of deception happening, as I've illustrated, has the potential to be. Go with the Christians. You need to believe in Jesus. At any rate, the fire from heaven miracle draws connection to the competition between Elijah and the Baal worshippers. It may therefore indicate a continuation of God proving himself above competing false gods. It may also prove a continuation of the same idolatry that was occurring all the way back with Elijah, all the way back in the Old Testament. Like, it's possible that same group, it's likely, I would even say, that same group of evil spiritual beings has just been, angling in different ways to try to deceive people and pull as many away as they can. And this is just the climax of that process. There's historic precedent to associate Baal worship to worship of a false moon god named Baal, and then later to some of the same materials, iconography, moon association practices as modern-day Islam. So again, it could be a continuation of the pagan worship practices that were occurring a long time ago. It may be that none of that stuff has ever fully ended, unfortunately. Various Muslim prophecies align with the prophetic details associated with the Antichrist in the Bible and also with the false prophet. So this looks to, because of the number of correlations, this starts to suggest that both sets will find some level of fulfillment, but only one of those sets comes from an authentic divine inspiration. The other is a corruption, or has a parasitic type of a relationship with the actual truth. And most obviously that is going to be the material that came secondarily, and was able to build off of the original text that's clearly divine inspired. Like the biblical false prophet, Muslim prophecy expects two figures, including a resurrected Jesus, to cause worship of the newly established world government. So if you see somebody coming and claiming that they're Jesus, this is literally, I'm paraphrasing at this point accidentally the things that Jesus said in Matthew 24. If you find someone that's saying, I'm he, you need to be careful. It'll be very plain and obvious that Jesus is the Jesus of the Bible, not this wicked, fake, false prophet that I believe is very likely to be the Muslim Jesus, who says that he's a prophet and not the Son of God. You need to make sure you got the right Jesus. You need to be very careful to make sure you got the right Jesus. The last bullet here, Islam and Christianity seem to prophesy the same event from opposing views, from opposing views, but specifically an event involving a group of marked individuals, and possibly that same group or another associated group being killed by a false resurrected Jesus. The Bible does not specifically say that the false prophet kills the witnesses, I believe. Could be wrong on that point. As it's coming out of my mouth, I'm second guessing myself. But the Muslim prophecy definitely says exactly that the false prophet will kill the marked witnesses. So there's at least some level of correlation there. Again, I feel like that bullet is the weakest of the things that I have to present here, but still worth having on the list. Okay, so finally, we'll just kind of do a little bit of my own speculation of how things might kind of play out here in association with all of this, starting with the impact that the rapture will have. Imagine, if you will, for a second that hundreds of millions, ideally well over 1 billion, ideally approaching 2 billion, ideally over 2 billion individuals who have self-identified as Christians disappear from the face of the earth. What you have then is around somewhere between a quarter to a third of the world population that suddenly disappears. And if it were to be all identified Christians, if I'm being less optimistic, at least 10% of the world's population, hopefully. That's a major chunk of the Christian population that suddenly disappears. And what that does then is it moves whatever remnant of the Christian church is left to a lesser position, and it elevates the Muslim population to a higher percentage of the total population of the world. Meanwhile, obviously, you've got another portion that's of other religious groups, and then you've got a big piece that is that does not identify with any particular belief system. All of those other people are going to be looking for an answer as to what just happened to the Christians. Literally, everybody that's left is going to want to know what the heck happened to all the people that just disappeared. What do they have in common? I don't even know if it'll be common knowledge or not that they were all Christians. That might be a thing that people have to figure out. But what that presents then is an opportunity to the newly dominant portion of the population, which will be the Muslims, because there's a quarter of them currently, a quarter of the world population is currently Muslim. So if you take a massive chunk of the Christian population, even as little as 10%, or even as little as 7%, that's enough for the Christian population to be at the same level or less than the Muslim population. And even if there's that many Christians, you have to keep in mind that the ones that got taken away were the actual believers, the ones that had enough belief, enough understanding, whatever, that they were in tune. They were doing what they were supposed to be doing. They were aligned. Their hearts were right. It's the ones that are left that didn't have it figured out, right? That's going to be really confusing for many of them. Some of them are going to think that they were like good, devout Christians. They're going to say, didn't they, like the examples that Jesus gives, I cast out demons in your name, but not everybody that says Lord, Lord, right? There's going to be portions of the Christian population that are going to think that they were good Christians and they didn't get taken. So they may be looking for other explanations. There might be some people that were identified as Christians, but they weren't very serious about it, but they were exposed to the concepts of the rapture and other things to where they can identify what happened, and they may become actual believers at that point because they've got a supernatural event that just occurred that has proven it to them. You're going to have people going in all different directions as far as that's concerned. You have some people that are Christians, and then they're going to start looking into Islam, which is already the case in the modern day, but if they didn't get taken, and you've got this people group that is the dominant factor in the world now, there's some compelling arguments as far as wanting to participate in the world government and the world economy. There could be a lot of reasons like that why people might consider crossing over. And then, you've got people presumably live TV or in public just performing miracles. And an individual that's claiming to be Jesus, and it looks like Jesus because that's what Revelation 13 says. Those are all potential reasons why someone could potentially be pulled over from a Christian background. And then everybody else that doesn't have that Christian background is even less likely to figure it out because they're presumably coming from either other religious groups or a secular perspective. They don't have a way in which to reconcile a supernatural event within their secular worldview. So they have to start venturing into a domain that they don't have a lot of experience in, and they're going to easily be deceived, not knowing which way's up as far as those things are concerned. So, and again, you see somebody performing other supernatural things, then you start looking in that direction. So that's just a handful of thoughts. The other thing that I would kind of add here, I think I have on the next slide, is that effectively the demographics are going to change really dramatically. Islam's going to be the dominant religious population of the world in that instance when the world is looking for answers. So that's a ripe opportunity for Islam to grow. And I'm obviously not the person that judges the hearts of men, but there's a high likelihood that a significant portion of self-identified Christians are going to be left. And I have suspicion that the Catholic Church will have some portion of that. I would not go so far as to say as everyone in the Catholic Church. That's not my belief at all. And again, I'm not the person that judges the hearts of men, but certainly there will be some from the Catholic Church that would be left behind just purely based off of the non-biblical doctrines and policies and things that have been pushed by kind of the upper echelon of the Catholic Church. So not looking to pick a fight there, but that's just my perspective. So it would not surprise me at all if the Pope were to potentially play a role in all of this. What with the most recent, not the current Pope, but rather the one that just passed, promoting universalism and coexistence and trying to build bridges between the other religions and that sort of thing. I get trying to promote peace and no violence and stuff like that, but it is a completely different thing for the representative of a division of what claims to be the Christian church, communicating that there's more than one path to God, which is a direct quote from the last pope. That is in direct contradiction to Jesus stating, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." That is one path that Jesus communicated to God, and you won't have to search very hard to find the Pope saying there's more than one path to God. So you can take that for whatever you want, but I'm pretty confident that people that are promoting other paths that are not the gospel are probably not finding their way into heaven. But again, I don't judge the hearts of men. All right, so then, because Islam is a lie built upon the pre-existing holy text of the Bible, it shouldn't come as a surprise that both Islam and the Bible seem to prophesy in parallel to each other. It's a parasitic kind of nature that Islam has, being built on the holy texts of the Bible. Both contain prophecy and conflict associated with Damascus. I highlighted that earlier in the presentation. Islam teaches that Damascus will be a central hub for Muslim armies, and that it will be a site for Jesus returning and conflict with a kind of evil Syrian leader, whereas the Bible prophesies the destruction of Damascus and some other judgments kind of associated with Syria, probably. Islam teaches that it will convert or conquer every non-Muslim in the world, establishing a Muslim world empire, which seems to directly align with the same kind of actions and motivations that the beast in Revelation 13 has. And Islam teaches that the Muslim Messiah, the Al-Mahdi, will be accompanied by a resurrected Jesus performing miracles and claiming that he's a prophet, and he'll redirect worship away from himself and towards the Al-Mahdi, the Muslim Messiah. This seems to parallel Revelation 13 perfectly, that a false prophet-led religious system that looks like the Lamb, looks like Jesus, will deceive many with public miracles and will deceive the world to worship the world government system that's being established by the Antichrist. It also directly parallels Jesus' warning in Matthew 24:11. Islam also teaches that the false resurrected Jesus prophet will kill forehead-marked unbelievers, which seems to parallel the Bible's prophecy about the 144,000 Jews, potentially, and also might have a potential correlation to the two witnesses that are killed in Revelation 11, but then resurrected 3 days later. Again, the mark having a significant difference in how it's interpreted. That KFR, if that were to actually be the mark, is a pretty wild addition to that, in that one side would interpret it as unbelievers, whereas the other side would interpret it as those that have been marked as atoned for by God. Last thing I want to highlight in this video is just, again, if you happen to be watching this content and a massive population of individuals has disappeared mysteriously and miraculously from the earth, possibly attributed with alien abduction or any other kind of wild ways in which people might try to explain that away, what happened is true Christian believers were taken. As is indicated in various places in the Bible, some places really directly, like in Matthew 24, where two are in a field and one is taken and one is left. Other places, well, there's other places that are direct like that too, but then there's also foreshadowing in narrative topology throughout the Old Testament that indicates that God saves his people before he brings wrath, be it Noah or anybody. And there's so many. I'm struggling to think of another example just because there's so many of them in the Old Testament. God saves his people before wrath. So if you're watching this and that happened, you need to believe in Jesus. That's what you need to do. That's the common denominator of the people that disappeared. You need to believe in the Jesus of the Bible, not the Jesus, not the fake Jesus that's probably on TV right now. You need to be very careful of that. You need to not be associated with a world governance that requires you to take a mark on your hand and your forehead, which the Bible is specific on. The Bible specifically warns that those that take that mark are condemned. But what you need to do instead is believe in Jesus Christ and his death for the atonement of your sins. Belief is the requirement for salvation. For God so loved the world that whosoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. So that's the requirement. That's what you need to do. Salvation is still available to you. You're probably in rough circumstances. You're probably scared. You're probably confused. But what you need to know is that salvation is still available to you, the same salvation that took the Christians off the earth in the first place. There's going to be more hardship. There's danger, for sure. Don't take the mark. Believe in Christ. Represent this truth to others. And save as many as you can, because Jesus is coming. And the entire host of heaven is coming with him to establish the kingdom of heaven on earth. So that's my hope now, and that's your hope then. So God bless whoever watches this. I hope it was helpful. I hope it helped to strengthen your faith.